Yo, 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 what's going on, y'all? Hope everyone's having a great Monday so far. This couch is torn apart. My mom gave us these couches, and there were a little bit of leather off of them, but because my guys walk on them, they're peeling so bad. I need some slip covers or new couches soon. So, I wanted to share something that came up yesterday. It's something I've never told anybody, ever. Told my wife. I never told my ex-wife because it happened when I was with my ex-wife. Um, Nobody until yesterday. So yesterday, my dude Diego, you may have seen him before. He goes by Diego Benjamin or Diego Cassini. He has some great viral videos. He shared a video where he talked about how taking astronomy class actually like really messed him up and created tons of anxiety for me. And I was like, holy shit, I remember. It just jogged my memory. So when I was a senior in college, my fourth year of college, because it took me 7 years to finish my undergrad. That's a whole different story. When you have two kids while you're in college and you enjoy playing basketball way more than going to class, it wasn't even like because I partied all the time. I just like playing basketball more than going to class. It was a big problem. But this was another reason why I didn't finish on time or within a reasonable amount of time. So I was taking an astronomy class. And to begin with, the lecture class was like at 6:40 p.m., which is like prime hoop time on like a Monday or Wednesday evening. This is prime hoop time. So I didn't want to go anyways, but I did. So I had the lecture class once a week. It was 3 hours. And then I had a lab. So this was 4 hours. These 4 credit hours I was taking at ASU. So astronomy lecture, astronomy lab. And for my degree, you had to have 2 sciences. So my freshman year, I took geology. Rocks for jocks is what we called it. That shit was cake. That was easy. So I'm taking astronomy, and I'm sitting in the second lecture hall of the year. And this is in the fall. And we just start talking about like the vastness of the universe and how big it is and how small we are in relation to all of it. And I just got this overwhelming sense while sitting there in class of panic and anxiety, and my mortality like just became like overwhelmingly apparent to me. I don't know why I'd never thought of it before. I don't know why I'd never gotten to me before. But all of a sudden, just my mortality and like how small and insignificant we are in the universe. I think we like to believe like that we're bigger than we are, we're more important than we are. But that moment when I realized like just how big the universe was, how small I was in comparison to that, it fucked me up bad, like really bad. And I basically had a panic attack there in class. And thank God it was towards the end of class because I was able to just like get through it and got out. And for about 2 weeks, I couldn't get the incessant thought out of my mind. And at the time, my ex-wife and I lived was now my ex-wife, she was my wife then, lived in El Mirage with my mom. So I had a long ass drive from Tempe to El Mirage those nights. It was like 45 minutes to an hour. And like back then there's no podcast, there's no phone, there's radio. And I didn't have even like a CD player in my car. So that whole time I was just like, I could not get the incessant thoughts out of my mind. And I tried going back to class. I skipped my lab that week. I tried going back to class the next week and I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to walk in the door because the whole discussion of the universe and all that, it triggered that anxiety even more for me. In the meantime, I had figured out ways to cope. So every time that would come up, I would just like think about a future event, and that helped me to get through it. Awful coping technique, but it worked for me at the time. But I was so shook by it that I literally had to stop going to the class, and I was able to withdraw, thank God. I didn't have to just take a F in the class, but I withdrew from the astronomy class and the lab because I was so terrified by this because it had shaken me so much. And I was so overwhelmed with anxiety. And I would get this just like overwhelming feeling of like doom of my own my own mortality, and the thought that kept running through my mind was there's going to be a point where I die where I am no longer conscious. And I don't remember before I was born that point where I wasn't conscious, but at some point my consciousness developed. Since then, I've learned that we don't lose that consciousness, that we are part of the cosmic consciousness, and that which is eternal in us never perishes. It never goes anywhere. We just switch forms. So I've come to terms with that. But that was so significant for me, and I've never told anybody this before, that I literally had to withdraw from the class because I couldn't do it anymore. So then, I'm approaching like my degree, and I still have on there, like, you have your credit list and like all the things you need to take. And it's like I have like a couple political science courses left. I had one more credit of Spanish left. And then I was done, except I had 4 hours, a lecture and a lab of a science that I needed. And I was looking at all of them. I was like, anything but astronomy, because that triggered me so bad. But 3 years later, I was better equipped to be able to handle that. So I faced the fear, I faced the challenge, and I took astronomy. And I did really well in the class. I enjoyed it. I accepted like the vastness of the universe and my own mortality and all those things, and I faced the fear, which was huge for me. And that was basically my last semester of college, of school. So it was just kind of like overcoming a lot of fears and objections and all the obstacles that I had had. And that's ultimately what allowed me to graduate. But I wanted to share this because when I talk about anxiety and how overwhelming it can be and how stressful it can be, like I want you to know, like, I've been there. Aside from anxiety, I've had like since I was probably a teenager. That was like the most significant and paralyzing to me, was that. And I'm blessed because it put me on this like path to be able to study and to be able to like really examine our mortality or immortality in terms of that, and come to terms with it and really see how the universe is built, the programming, how we interact with it, and all those things. But for me, that was a really significant time, and probably the most powerless I've ever felt, aside from going through my divorce and those things. So it came back up again for me, but it taught me a really valuable lesson in the fact that I was able to, take the course again and experience the same things. And I did it with the same instructor, same format, same everything, evening classes in Tempe, and was able to overcome that, which was huge for me. But so my point in offering this, one, is to tell it because I've never told the story before. Two is to let you know that you can vulnerably share your feelings and experiences, and it doesn't diminish you in any way. It doesn't diminish your credibility, doesn't diminish your authority. I'm sure there's people listening right now live, or people that will be listening on the replay, that something like that happened in you. And I can really credit my boy Diego for sharing what he did, because it triggered that in me and brought it up. And I was like, I've never talked about this before. So in doing right now, I am literally healing parts of me that didn't get healed by me taking the class, by expressing this and telling you guys how fucking shook I was, how scared, how terrified I was. And I literally couldn't tell anybody because I had this vulnerability block, because I couldn't be vulnerable with people. I couldn't even tell my wife at the time because, I don't know, I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of the discussion. I was afraid of all of that stuff. And I want you to know that you don't have to be afraid to be vulnerable. You don't have to be afraid to share your fears. More often than not, whatever fears you have, there's somebody else who's experienced them or is still experiencing them or going through what you're going through. And there's always love and support out there for you, and people that are willing to accept you. And especially men, because we're taught that we have to portray this certain image of not being scared, of not being afraid. And that dialogue has to change so that we can describe and we can verbalize and articulate what it is that we're afraid of. literally just had a moment as you were describing this of thinking about my own mortality. It really puts things in perspective. How precious, yeah. And I don't want to trigger anybody into that themselves and give them the experience I did, unless you're meant to have that experience. And I'm meant to be the one to trigger it for you, but I would also be happy to be the one to help you work through it and help you understand that. It is crazy how precious our lives are and how much of a gift this is. So for you, Oda, to take that, and if I can speak a little bit personally right to you, I know that taking action and really stepping into purpose is part of your journey. So putting that into perspective and knowing that you have one chance at this life, and it's time to not wait and time to step into that and time to take action and to use that fear as purpose to step into things. I actually used that fear back in those moments. My coping tool, Focus on the Future, was actually directed at my goal or my vision for playing basketball professionally. And every time that thought of mortality and fear would come up in me, what I would do is I'd go to a present moment of me realizing my goal, or even just the steps that I needed to take in there, because it would take my focus off of that mortality and put it into that. But that also taught me a really important lesson in coping, in that I can take my focus off of a future event, which would be dying or whatever, and put it into the present moment. Even though I was taking it from future and put it in the future, it's still an effective tool to be able to redirect your attention and your focus and bring that back to the present moment. And when you do so, anxiety doesn't have the stronghold on you that it does. So it actually taught me a very, very powerful lesson in that moment. So again, I'm sharing this vulnerably because that's what I do. And if you don't know me, know this, that vulnerability is terrifying to me. But the more I show up, the less strength that fear has for me. And the more that I share vulnerably, the more I heal through that. So I'm healing through this process and hoping to help and inspire others to do the same. And I want you to know that you can be vulnerable. It's safe for you to be vulnerable. Whatever trauma happened to you when you were young, where you made the decision that is not safe for you to be vulnerable, that you're going to get hurt, that you're not going to get acceptance, you're not going to get love, it's no longer true. It is no longer true. That is just your patterns thinking that the old paradigm, that the old situations are going to be applicable in the present, and it's untrue. You will be safe, you will be supported, you can be vulnerable, and there is health, there's healing, there's well-being, there is power in your vulnerability. Love you guys. Bye.